Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming here today. The session is BUSS ZYAADA BAAT NAHIN, Chief SAAB. This is a retrospect of Nadeem Farooq Paracha's career. We'll be discussing the work he's done on cultural criticism, how it's evolved, what he's looking towards in the future. I thought I'd just say one word, which was that when I started my career, I was actually I was a lecturer at a public university, and we had a very famous department in our university. And in that university, what happened in that department was one teacher went, one professor, he didn't have a PhD, he became the professor of his friend who was then his student, and he gave him a PhD. Then that guy gave it to his other friend, and then it became really famous that they all gave each other PhDs. So last year at the KLF, Nadeem Farooq Paracha was the moderator, and I was the guest. This year, I'd just like to welcome Dr. Paracha. So we're going to open up the session, and we're going to just discuss your career.
Yeah, before we start, I want to sort of say that in the next KLF, I'll be the host again, and Fasi will be one of the participants.
One of the participants.
हमने एक तीसरे बंदे को ऐसे ही रख लिया है.
ये शक ना पड़े किसी को कि it's all gamed. But I just want to point out that Nadeem has recently also published a number of books. He's published End of the Past, The Pakistani Anti-Hero, Points of Entry, and Muslim Modernism as well. So I think I'll just open by asking do you remember the first article you ever published?
Yes, I do. It was published in middle of 1987. I was about to join the Karachi University, and it was published in a newspaper called The Star. And I do. It was 87, yeah.
And what was it about?
It was just about student politics and stuff like that. But The funny thing is that column of mine actually got me fired from the university. And not by the administration, but by a student group which didn't sort of agree with what I was writing. So I wasn't able to finish my MA just because of that column.
So that's what he probably told his father. But what was the first article that you felt made an impact? That you recognized, okay, wait, this is actually getting some degree of...
Yeah, that was 1992 when there was the first operation against MQM. I did a whole feature for a magazine which was called MAG. I think it's still around. And it took about 12 pages, and that made a huge impact, so much so that Altaf Hussain, who had left Pakistan in that very year, wanted me to talk to him. So what happened was that after that was published, I was invited by the editor of a newspaper, Urdu newspaper called Aman, which was pro-MQM. And its offices used to be near the MAG's office on I.A. Chandrigarh Road. And I was called there, and I waited, and Mr. Hussain wanted to first know what the questions are going to be. So as I was making the questions, तो फैक्स एक आया और उस फैक्स में ऑलरेडी क्वेश्चंस थे, और फिर उसके बाद एक और फैक्स आया, उसमें आंसर भी थे. तो हमने वो नहीं छापा, लेकिन फिर मेरी एडिटर समरा नियाजी, उनको एक फ़ोन कॉल आया कि आपने क्यों नहीं छापा. बोले भाई हमने ना आपसे ये सवाल पूछे, ना आपने खुद ही सवाल करके खुद ही जवाब दे दिया. वी couldn't do it. But very next week, without me knowing, I saw the whole interview there with my byline. And I thought that was impactful enough. And the interview was read more than my story. So I didn't mind that.
Okay. Just a question I think that comes up, and it's interesting that you say this was the first piece that actually made an impact, is why is it that there's a certain category of people who have a national view of Pakistan, who often tend to tell muhajirs that enough with this identity. You've been here for 70 years. Why does this persist?
Well, because the first argument is that it cannot be an ethnicity because they're not the people of the soil. They come from various cities which in India. And the whole muhajir thing of them being an ethnicity wasn't there till about, I would say, late 1970s. After that, इस पे बहुत काम किया और MQM का बहुत बड़ा हाथ है to sort of define what muhajir ethnicity or what muhajir is. I think one of the reasons is that they're still not accepted as an ethnicity. And there will always be a problem because they're not Punjabi, they're not Pashtun, they're not Baloch, they're not Sindhi. People who've always been here and were here even before the creation of Pakistan. Muhajirs came afterwards. And a lot of Muhajirs, actually when this whole project of turning Muhajirs into an ethnic group was started in earnest in the late 1970s, especially in the 1980s, there were a lot of Muhajirs who were against it. They didn't want to be seen as that. But then as things transpired in Karachi and with the Muhajirs, a lot of Muhajirs said that to exist and to survive in this country, one has to have some sort of an ethnic identity to sort of claim some political influence and economic influence. So that's how it started. But there's always been a question mark on that because there are still a lot of Muhajirs who still don't agree with that. They just want to call themselves Pakistanis.
Okay. Just another question is that given the wide spectrum of your work and how long you've done it, and it's interesting to see you occasionally online, this is the fact, you're wrong, लेकिन ये लोग कभी नहीं मानेंगे, ये दानिश्वर जो अपने आप को कहते हैं. Do you ever feel that there's any work of yours that in retrospect you now feel was not right, was in some way that you have regrets on?
Yeah, a lot of stuff, especially in the 90s, when I used to write a lot about the pop culture. I was much younger, and much of my work in the 90s I like to disown because I believe that I was just too trigger happy to denounce certain people, especially certain artists, even though I thought that I was doing them a favor because this is also true that I helped a lot of those people get the attention which they couldn't have. But there are a lot of stuff which I'm embarrassed about.
What is it that makes you embarrassed about?
I don't know, maybe the language I use, it was too rhetorical, it was too, like, for example, I thought that my writings were bringing some sort of social revolution in the country, which was nonsense. There was no social revolution coming. I was part of some change, but I wasn't the change.
Okay. Again, in terms of like your own growth as an intellectual, what was the earliest part that you could remember that you said, okay, I've read something that has expanded my mind or changed the way I view material reality?
That's easy. I think I was in first year college, and after reading people like, I stumbled upon people like K.K. Aziz and Dr. Mubarak Ali and Aisha Jalal. And one of the most liberating feeling was when I realized that Muhammad bin Qasim wasn't the first Pakistani. It was amazing. And then all sorts of stuff just opened up. And I realized that everything we've been taught or told on television or through books, everything is questionable. And most of it is based on a lot of myths. And that was a very liberating feeling, and that sort of started a journey which is still going on discovering so much which is still to be discovered as far as Pakistan is concerned.
So what is it that you thought about Muhammad bin Qasim and now you know about Muhammad bin Qasim?
Muhammad bin Qasim was such a huge character when we were young. And once I started reading a lot of stuff, which and अब तो बहुत सारा लिखा गया उन पे. Mohammed bin Qasim पे there is not much sort of literature out there or sources. Like even in the first 400 years or after 400 years, Muhammad bin Qasim is mentioned 400 years after he invaded Sindh. Even the Arab sources are very vague about it. It's not such a huge issue. It's not such a huge topic. And we first hear it in maybe in the 13, 12, 13, 14th centuries that he's mentioned. Muhammad bin Qasim actually comes into the picture in the 19th century when the Muslim rule in this country started to recede, and the Hindus started sort of coming up with their own myths. So the Muslim intellectuals reacting to what was going on, they just sort of built up Muhammad bin Qasim as the first Muslim ruler, which he wasn't. And that is how the Muhammad bin Qasim myth starts to develop. And then when we come to the 1950s, a lot of people think this whole myth was actually created maybe after we lost East Pakistan. But I have a book which was published by the Archaeology Department of Sindh, and it's, I think, 1950 or 1951. That is where, while they were excavating or doing some work in Mohenjo-daro somewhere, so they sort of landed up with supposedly they found a mosque, and they said this was built by Muhammad bin Qasim, and that Muhammad bin Qasim was actually the first Pakistani.
Right.
That is when this thing started. And then it was taken over by the religious party especially. And a very interesting, in the late 1960s, a very interesting debate you can find, especially in Sindh, where you see G.M. Sayyid saying that Muhammad bin Qasim was the usurper and Raja Daher was the real hero because he was indigenous and is Sindhi. And the Jamaat Islami saying, no, that is not true. Muhammad bin Qasim was the liberator and Raja Daher was the usurper. So these sort of things we didn't know. One is never taught at colleges or schools especially.
So, again, thinking of like music, like the way you discussed that you have regrets over some of the things you pointed out in the 90s. What do you think that in Pakistan, at least for urban audiences, what's been the most consequential piece of music?
Nazia Hassan and Zoeb Hassan, I think when they really released the 1980 album Disco Diwane, was so unprecedented. I mean, the sound of it, the whole experiment, I mean, that changed a lot. And the most interesting thing about that release is that it was released during General Zia's regime, when he had, just a year before he had released, he had sort of issued a thing called Hadood Ordinance, which actually kick-started his so-called Islamization process. And in 1980, this album comes in and everybody goes mad about it. And a year later, she became so popular that Raja Zafarul Haq, who's now in PMLN, he used to be one of the ministers in the information ministry, I think, during the Zia regime. And he advised Ziaul Haq that this is contradicting the sort of society you're trying to create. So Nazi and Zoeb were totally banned from PTV and Radio Pakistan. But Ziaul Haq was a curious character. He used to listen to all music and watched a lot of television. And he invited both Nazia and Zoeb, I think they were just 16 or 17 years old, and in front of television cameras, we saw it on PTV, Ziaul told him the ins and outs of Islam and what they should wear and what they shouldn't wear. And the two kids just sat there, just nodding their heads. And eventually what he did was that he said, okay, fine, you can go whatever you want to do. And the ban was lifted. And people like Raja Zafarul Haq and a lot of people in his Majlis Ashura, that was called, they didn't like that. So, but I think that was that time when Nazi and Zoeb album was, that changed Pakistani music as far as pop is concerned. A lot of people think it started with Dil Dil Pakistan in late 80s. No, it was Nazi and Zoeb who actually planted the seed, which sort of grew into the tree, which we later saw and chopped.
So why do you think that when people have these oral histories about what it is about music, where there were inflection points, that Nazia and Zohaib don't get that kind of credit.
Well, because I think basically Nazia unfortunately passed away very early, so she couldn't carry on that story. Um, Even when I'm sure the last album I think they recorded in 1991, but had she been alive, she would have still been in the picture, commenting or doing whatever. So her history or what she did would have gone on. But in a way, people have forgotten about it mostly. Like, for example, if I was about to try to get her first album, Disco Divan, it's not there. I couldn't find it in the market. People didn't know about it. So I had to download it from somewhere, and it's a very bad MP3, which is unfortunate.
So, again, there was also a period where when you were writing, you contracted your name, right, during the 90s, and you preferred, like Prince, you preferred NFP. And so what was it that made you choose that one particular contraction, and why is it that you're not using it now? Because a lot of people say you were just influenced by KFC.
No. First of all, I never sort of created that. It was an accident. I used to work in Mac, and within my features, I used to do little boxes. So one of the editors, instead of writing my full name, used to write NFP. So I became NFP from there. I used to hate it in the beginning, but in the end, everybody started calling me NFP. But then, but I've never sort of signed off as NFP or as such. I sometimes do, but it was that gentleman, I think his name was Javed, and he created it in 1991, 92. And, but the funny part is that sometimes my 8-year-old nephew now calls me NFP. That's a cause for concern.
Right. In terms of, again, I remember, so you're talking about your MAG period. I actually used to read you during the MAG period. And one of the things that just occurred to me that I remembered was that you wrote a piece on Noor Jahan. And then the week after that, they had to write an apology. Okay, we don't know how this guy published this and, whatever. What was the fallout? And it was just a satirical piece about her stature, the idea of being a madam, things like that.
Yeah, at that time it was easier being irreverent about things. Like I said, I regret a lot of stuff I've written. And it's not just Noor Jahan, there were so many others as well. Because I thought, big deal, fine. Because sometimes I thought that someone is getting too much praise and nobody's looking the other side of whatever. Because Noor Jahan also sang some terrible songs,
Right.
So I was more into the terrible side of Noor Jahan, maybe.
Right.
And that was the more interesting side.
Okay. Now, in at least the past 3 years, so much change has happened in Pakistan, but they say there are still some things that you can be assured will happen. So one is that every year you'll have Tehreek-e-Labbaik stop traffic in Islamabad and Nadeem Paracha publish a book. So how is it that you're being so prolific? At least, 4 books in 3 years. How is it that you manage that? And
I think it's always been ironically, it's because I'm a lazy person. And the least amount of physical work required is, I can achieve that by writing stuff, and I enjoy it. And the thing is, like I said, basically I'm not creating anything new. I know what my audience has always been, and especially now. There are a lot of young people out there with whom I want to share what I've discovered, all the myths which I've managed to sort of undo. I want to share those with them, and that's the sort of language I also use. I don't use a heavily academic language in my stuff. I'm writing for them, and I know how they're reacting, because I don't want that they should sort of also go through what I went through, a long period of just believing a lot of nonsense, So at least I want to put something in front of them so they can sort of investigate themselves. but a different point of view. So that drives me. And the sort of reactions I get is amazing. And that keeps me going. And like I said, there's still so much to be discovered and undo and do as far as Pakistan is concerned and our history is concerned. So in other ways, there are a few more books up
So
on the
do
way.
you ever fear that with this rate of production, because you're also writing columns, you're doing even separate, not just for Dawn, but for Nayadawar and elsewhere
Yeah.
as well, do you ever feel that it compromises your quality or that you've repeated yourself?
Repetition होती है, definitely होती है, because there are, लेकिन वो on purpose होती है, because if you want to get a point across, you have to repeat it. And being a regular columnist who writes about 3 columns a week, the main column, of course, is the Dawn one. Sometimes, but like I say, I'm aware of the reputation. I try to sort of reword it in a different manner, but there are certain things I want to keep hammering. And personally, I don't think it impacts the quality because I'm still enjoying writing. As far as you're enjoying it, because it's a learning process as well for me. Because to come up with a new column every week, I have to study. I have to write like go through stuff. And like I said, as long as I keep enjoying it, I don't think the quality sort of gets affected.
Okay. Another thing that sort of occurs to me is that when you're evaluating history and at least writing from the 90s and 2000, even currently, one of the questions as being a popular culture writer or one who's examining politics is maybe a forewarning that this is not going in the right direction. The course needs to be corrected. I just wonder is that when you were in 1990 and thinking about Pakistan, what did you think Pakistan in 2020 would be like?
Well, to tell you the truth, I thought I'll never be around till 2015 even, for all sorts of reasons. But I don't know. I can't tell what Pakistan, because 90s, there are a lot of kids out there now who romanticize 1990, but it was a terrible decade. It was a terrible decade. It was chaos. And nobody knew exactly what was going on because the Cold War had ended. There was a huge gap. This whole new religious thing was coming up, and there were sectarian organizations, and then there was, especially Karachi was terrible. Everybody was moving out. So I'm sure whatever I used to think, I was quite pessimistic. But it's amazing that we've survived beyond the 1990s. Yes, we've gone through a lot of bad stuff recently as well. During the suicide bombings and everything. But I tell you, 1990s was the worst decade for this country, and especially for this city. And getting out of that, I sometimes just can't figure out how we got out. But if we did, that means that we want to get out, that we want to move on. So I think one can call that optimism. I hope we still have that spirit.
So just out of curiosity, now in almost 2020, where do you think we'll be in 2040?
Well, again, it's very easy for me to say the way things are going, maybe we won't be there in 2040. But I think we will be there because there is at least an awareness in certain state institutions, especially, which count, that we might not have been doing things the way they should have. One can debate how they're going about it, trying to clean up stuff, but at least there's now an awareness. But like I said, things change. Things can change. Like for example, ever since 2015, the city has seen a huge change for the better, comparatively speaking. But you never know. The thing is, we have to understand that are we solving the problem in an effective manner, or are we just putting a lid on it? Because that's what Musharraf did. He put a lid on everything, and everybody thought everything is fine. But the first sign of a dip in the economy and his regime facing certain crisis, the lid just blew off, and all sorts of monsters came out. I hope we're not doing that again.
But in terms of, let's say, whether institutions are more aware or they're looking at things, there is an effort to put on a lid on things right now. There's also stage managing the whole process. Do you think that this could potentially, we count Karachi maybe as a success story, but would this actually happen nationally?
Like I said, that lid thing doesn't work. Lid thing will never work. If there are frustrations, there are fissures in the society, they will come out one way or the other. You have to solve them, resolve them in a more intelligent manner, in a more empathetic manner, than in a more in a bossy manner or in a manner just the way we did. Like I said, during the Musharraf era, we all were fooled in the beginning. We thought, oh wow, everything was going great, but it wasn't. The way the explosion happened afterwards, and we saw from 2007 till 2015, it was madness. Thousands of people died, including politicians, civilians, soldiers, cops. And it was terrible. I mean, we are trying our best to forget that period, but if that period is going to haunt us, and we have to learn from that period, it was terrible.
Another thing is that if we go back to satire, we see a really interesting expansion and contraction of satire, at least on television, in terms of popular culture. You had the 80s, which was a fairly strong period for some types of satire, especially on television. In the 90s, in some ways, it contracted in one form, but it expanded. It was applying much more in terms of how you consumed entertainment, whether it was music. Then in the 2000s, possibly towards the end, it truly, really expanded. And now it has contracted into a very specific, finite form on TV. What explains this sort of ebb and flow?
I think it all depends on what sort of politics one is experiencing. For example, in the 1980s, and I agree that satire which came out in the 1980s was of very good value, very good quality, and that was because there was so much repression. Like, for example, during the ZIAADA regime, a writer couldn't use the word socialism, democracy, and so on. You couldn't. So people had to sort of work their way around and try to sort of dodge the censors, and that made them think. That's why you see that Anwar Masood's satire is brilliant in the 1980s, and he managed to do it on state-owned television, and it was intelligent because he had to do it. That's why the quality of satire and comedy and parody in the 1980s still stands out, even though most of it is not political, but that wasn't allowed. But he somehow managed to say it in different ways. Then we see another sort of satire which is more in your face during the Musharraf era, especially the tail end of Musharraf's regime. There weren't any restrictions. You see, there's another irony there. During that dictatorship, I thought there was so much freedom that some of it backfired as well. We used to do a show during Musharraf era, and we used to get away with anything. But then, as happens, too much freedom and good satire turned into parody, and then turned into a self-parody. And people sort of got off with it. And now what's happened is, and I've always been saying, that reality has become a self-parody. How do you satirize something which is satirizing itself? We see it, how world leaders are behaving. We see how local leaders are behaving, the way they are going around doing things. You cannot satirize that stuff. They are satirizing themselves. So we see the decline of satire once again, because now people who are to be satirized are satirizing themselves. So that's I think one of the reasons why satire is suffering at this point in time.
Again, in terms of, if you look at your work, I find it interesting that you were talking about the 90s and you considered that to be a really bad period. And we see a reflection of some of the progress that came out of the 90s. So this Charter of Democracy was essentially that we established the rules of the democratic game so that we don't undermine each other in a way that makes the system suffer. And today you have a lot of people decrying this as just elites getting together for power preservation. So why do you think that there is a amnesia every 10 years? Because every 10 years we come back to the things about questioning the credentials of the democratic project. We think about, lessons that seemed to be so vivid just a decade ago become discredited again.
I don't think it's amnesia. I think the problem in Pakistan is that we've never taken history or documenting ourselves very well. The other reason is that there are so many versions of history out there. Everybody's got their favorite version of history, and it can be a history of our religion, it can be history of political history of Pakistan, cultural history, whatever. There's so many histories out there that everybody has their own understanding of what happened, during any period. Take for instance the 1965 and 1971 wars. You'll hear you can get so many versions of it, exactly what happened. The same thing. So people don't really forget. People just hang on to what they think was what happened, and what really happens, that is forgotten. That gets lost in explanations and rationalizations, which may not be true as such. So, and nobody really gets down to sort of doing a really objective project of trying to really dig out what really happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 70 years ago, so on and so forth. I think that's the problem.
So, related to this, you once mentioned something which I found fascinating, which is the question of the deathbed fantasy. And if you could explain that.
Yeah, it's associated with what I was saying. Like, for example, Abhi recently, Imran Khan, Prime Minister Imran Khan, posted a video on Twitter. The video was of the prominent late Islamic scholar Dr. Israr. And it was a 1988 video in which Dr. Israr was claiming that a 1988 Jung report said that when Mr. Jinnah was dying, was on his deathbed, he suddenly woke up and told his doctor that he was for a caliphate movement or a caliphate system in Pakistan. And then he said, Allah is great, and he passed away. Now, this has been sort of dismissed. But recently I realized that this sort of thinking or this sort of projecting something what you believe on someone else, it has been a tradition in this country. I'll give you an example. Exactly the same thing happened when in 1939 Kamal Ataturk passed away. So there used to be a newspaper called Inqilab, Urdu newspaper, this is before partition, which was a favorite of Muslims in Delhi, Lahore, etc. So the day after Ataturk passed away, a front page report appeared in Inqilab saying that Ataturk, who was in a coma, suddenly woke up, had a chat with his servant, and told the servant that go out and give my message that Millat-e-Islamiyya should follow on the footsteps of the caliphs. And then he shouted Allah Akbar and died. And I said, the similarity is amazing. And then as I went on, I saw that these sort of things keep appearing, especially in Urdu papers, of people who have nothing to do with this, suddenly waking up from comas or on their dying beds, holding these complex discussions with servants and doctors about how they had been wrong and how Sharia law was great, and then shouting Allah Akbar and dying. And the thing is, people still believe it. So there's this theory that there are two kinds of realities. The empirical reality is that which we sort of interact every day. And people who don't like what they see in the empirical reality, they create a conceptual reality. And conceptual reality is that, and especially conceptual reality is driven and created mostly by people who are heavily invested in certain ideologies. So what they start doing is they start projecting their own fantasies onto people who have nothing to do with them. So for example, the guy who said that Jinnah said this was actually knew that Jinnah said nothing like this, and Jinnah was the total opposite of what. So, but he said, okay, ab wo to khatam hone wale, ab laga do uske upar. सो जिन्ना साहब को उन्होंने नारा भी मरवा दिया और वो भी हो गया. इसी तरह कमाल अतातुर्क के साथ भी क्या, वी ऑल न्यू व्हाट कमाल अतातुर्क वाज. ही वाज अ staunch secular Turkish nationalist and who actually died of alcoholism. But जाते जाते उनको उनके भी नारा दिलवा दिए. But the thing is, this thing goes on because they are not liking what they're seeing in reality, with which we call the empirical reality. And that's how, and then there are a lot of people who still do that. Like when Imran, Mr. PM, posted that, the PM, Prime Minister believed it, his followers believed it, and they were happy. Oh, fine. Now these guys who say that Jinnah was secular and Jinnah was that, here's the proof. Isko aap bataएं किस तरह, you know? So they were happy. So that crisis in them was solved by that one 1988 video.
So I think I'll relate this to something else. Like one of the more famous or infamous things that you've done was write a satirical piece on Malala Yousafzai. It found an audience in Iran. It found an audience in all over Pakistan, that it was truth, that she's actually a cyborg, that she was made by CIA scientists, and then subsequently she's come up and become this thing that will undermine.
Exactly.
My question is, even relatively intelligent people, even privileged people, why is it that they get caught up? And you were talking about this conceptual reality. Why is there such a strong desire to believe anything that can, with 2 minutes of thought, can lead to refutation?
I don't know. It's again the way we've been trained. I can only talk about Pakistan. Even from any class, it can be a kid studying in a government school, a kid studying in grammar school, where I studied. They're teaching almost the same history. They're teaching almost the same myths. They're teaching almost the same things. So that gets ingrained in us. And the thinking is that we all end up, while we even growing, no matter how rich we are, poor we are, educated or uneducated, we end up, each one of us end up creating conceptual realities. And we want to protect it because that becomes our identity. The moment we feel that this identity is being attacked, we either react in a very reactionary manner, or we start projecting it in other things. And we end up, like Malala thing, what that whole satire was, that all these projections that she's a Western agent, or she's this, or she's that, it was just a compilation of all these theories turned into written in a very straight-faced report manner. And everybody saw that as that's the truth. And since it was published in Dawn, and we've had to put up a disclaimer later on, everybody wanted it from not only here, even Iran, their official media outlet, Press TV, they published it. Certain Urdu newspaper published it, and we had to put 2 disclaimers, first on the top and then bottom. It still goes on. And last year, I think, when Malala came over here, I don't know if it was last year or 2017, when she was here, that came back. Someone translated that into Urdu and printed it in a newspaper, and everybody's sharing it.
So just following up with this is that you have you've already got an audience. You've had an audience in the 90s, you've had an audience in the 2000s, and there have been people who've been highly critical of your work back then as well, and people are critical today. But in the age of Facebook and Twitter, what has changed?
Very simple. Last year, or this year, at a festival in Lahore called Think Fest, Aisha Jalal said something very interesting. She said there's a difference between critiquing and criticizing. So that whole ability and the tradition of critiquing has gone. Criticism has taken over, and that is sort of spoiling a lot of stuff. Like people are, it's very easy to criticize. It's okay to critique. That remains constructive. So recently, with this explosion of Twitter and Facebook and the whole dynamics of it, people want to make an immediate reactionary statement or immediate statement, and that doesn't give you the space to critique. Like one cannot critique a thing in about how many words now Twitter has, about 140?
240.
240.
280.
You cannot. You cannot. And if you do, it'll sound weird and nobody will be interested. So, and all this, and all this is done for shock value as well. They want a lot of retweets. They want to be get attention. So they end up just talking nonsense basically most of the times. So, well, for example, I've blocked about 14,000 people on Twitter, and it's weird because I still feel weird because at least you can control what people say on your timeline and Facebook, but you can't do it on Twitter. And I feel like it's strange that what happens if I go outside on the road and some people who I don't know start, abusing me. I'll end up hitting them or vice versa. But that happens every day on Twitter. But thank God for blocking things. But I still feel outraged, and I on a lot of occasions I don't want to be on it because nobody has the right to walk up to you and start talking, about whatever comes to their mind, and not really the mind, whatever comes in their mouth, basically. The mind is not involved as such. So that's the difference. I think the whole critique thing is ended. It's gone back. One can read it in generals or whatever. So criticism has come up, and most of it is not valid, unfortunately.
So 2 questions here. One is that if people who are then, however they're interacting with you online, if their premise is that if you have the right to critique X, Y, Z and whatever, meri bhi sun lo.
नहीं देखें, I have the right to critique,
Right.
not criticize. I try to do that. Of course, I end up sometimes criticizing stuff as well, but at least I'm conscious that I'm presenting a critique, trying to balance it out. So there's a whole thinking process behind it. Even if it's a tweet, I have to think about it. It just cannot be there.
Right.
So, but people are not doing it. I think people are not doing it. There are some very good tweeters out there, which I enjoy, but there has to be a process of making a statement or making a comment against someone. One has to think about it, that at least have your facts right.
Right. Now, the second part of this is that in the 90s, you were younger, you were angrier, and now you're at literature festivals, kitabe bhi hai, America bhi trip lag jata hai. And you and I have discussed this before, is that do you ever fear that the edge is coming off, that now you have settled in as an elder figure in this whole scene?
Well, what started happening was truly that what I actually started fearing was my own anger. I started fearing myself because it stopped achieving what I thought it was achieving. It stopped propelling me or driving me. It became a very self-destructive phenomena or exercise. So, yeah, of course, one grows up, and I'm enjoying it. I don't mind this at all. It comes with time, and I think I've become. This has given me the opportunity to think about things in a more like systematic manner. But I think it happens to everybody. But like, it will be idiotic if I start behaving which I used to behave as a 20 or 22-year-old. It just won't make sense. And like I said, a point came that I started scaring myself. And some people sort of are okay with that. I wasn't. So I decided to evolve, maybe.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up for questions for everyone, but just one last question, and I realize we need to talk much more about many other things, but in terms of your own early influence, your father as a journalist, I mean, what do you think that you took from him, and where did you sort of deviate?
My father was an extremely private man, and he was a genuine journalist, like old-fashioned journalists used to be, who weren't really into getting a lot of attention, who weren't stars, They wanted to do a thorough job and didn't like the limelight a lot. I respected that, and I learned a lot from the thinking that this sort of attitude sort of brings. But but I was growing up in an age where people wanted to be noticed and get attention, and if they thought that they had something special to say, they ought to be listened to, and that's where I deviated. But other than that, much of my attitude towards how to go about knowing things, I learned from him.
So I'm going to open up the floor to some questions. And I believe we have a microphone that will be going around. If you could just raise your hands and we'll go one by one. I'll take 2-3 questions at once, have Nadeem answer them, and then go into a second one. So if we could have the first question over there, in the pink, over there. Yes.
You said in your youth you believed in a lot of nonsense. What kind of nonsense did you believe in, and why don't you believe in it anymore?
What sort of nonsense? A lot of nonsense. There's so much nonsense going on as I was growing up. You have to remember, I hope, that I was growing up in a country where just had one news channel, one TV channel, one radio channel, and it was very hard for someone to get an alternative point of view. Even books were banned. So what we heard, like the whole Muhammad bin Qasim myth, for example, and stuff like that, which is nonsense. There's so much nonsense now as well. It's okay.
All right. Have we given the microphone?
Yeah.
Yes?
Hello. Hi. Hello, Nadeem. My question is from you, and Fasi, to an extent, with you as well. Nadeem, you mentioned that back in the day, you wrote a lot of stuff. In that time, you believed in a certain context of things. And yes, with age, you believe in some stuff. As the lady mentioned, some stuff is nonsense to you in the future, and some stuff is nonsense to you in the past. And then the things change as you evolve with time. My question is that when you said you were having issues with your own anger when putting stuff on paper, it could be satire, could be anything. Sorry, could be satire, could be anything. How do you tackle with the issue of writing satire when it comes to कि कल जिस चीज़ पे जैसे मैं मजाक कर सकता था, अब वो चीज़ sensitive issue हो गया है, but I still feel angry or I still feel strongly about this issue I want to talk about. So how do you tackle that, like that, drawing that kind of a line in which you know that this is going to fall into satire? जैसे आपने मलाला का जो piece लिखा था, I read that one, I thoroughly enjoyed it. The whole cyborg thing, because you took the observation of society and put it into a context कि हाँ ये ऐसे दिखा सकते हैं, but you still got a lot of backlash for that as well. So how do you draw the line for like writing future pieces in that way?
It's become very tough. Like I said, I learned a lot of how people worked around censorship and sensitive issues in the 1980s. I used to read them, see them. So I think I learned a lot from that. And now I agree with you. It has become tougher. A lot of people want to sort of react to everything you write about, because satire basically comes, I think, at least when I used to do a lot of satire writing, it came out of anger and disgust. But since I couldn't exhibit that sort of anger and disgust in the manner I used to when I was younger, so I chose satire. But that sort of has become a problem now as well. And there's so much out there, like the whole nature of satire has changed recently as well. Now we see some fantastic memes coming out. It's more social media based. So people really don't get into reading the sort of satire I used to do, let's say on Dawn and stuff like that. The Malala one was the last, I think. Now people want quick stuff, quick memes, quick witty stuff, quick small little videos, which is fantastic. I enjoy them as well. So maybe I went out through them maybe by liking them or just not liking them maybe. So that has changed. So that is how the satire, how it's been written and being made is also changing. So, but I agree, it's become tougher to comment. It's easy if you have a Twitter account and nobody knows who you are and you use just a handle to do all sorts of stuff. But if you are a known personality, you have a face and you have a name and people know where you are, where you were, that becomes a problem. So one has to be careful.
Okay, just one small question, Nadeem. Do you think in the year 2050 there will be a lot of influence of China and Pakistan, and then that could perhaps be positive for as far as the de-radicalization of the country is concerned? Thank you.
That is very interesting. I've always been thinking about it. मैं तो बहुत खुश होता हूँ चीनी आते जाएं. Yeah, the thing is, the question now is, will the Chinese presence and whatever they're doing over here have an impact on our culture? In a way, it is having it. And the good thing is, no matter what they do, we keep quiet about it. So if the Chinese come in and they do stuff which is otherwise not allowed in this country and nobody says anything, I think that's a good thing. But I don't know if Chinese intervention जहाँ होती है, Chinese involvement जहाँ होती है, वो culture पे किस तरह impact करती है, इसको हमने study करना पड़ता है. If they just come in, do their own stuff, make money and not bother your culture, फिर इतना नहीं होगा. But I think कुछ ना कुछ तो कर बंदा इसको as opportunity use कर सकता है to get away or do stuff. One can say कि उनके कंधे पे बंदूक रख के चला सकते हैं आप, knowing that nobody's going to say anything. So let's see what happens, how it goes.
जी मेरा सवाल ये है कि what kind of nationalism is shaping Pakistan today?
What sort of nationalism? It's the same nationalism, but एक ही nationalism जो develop हुआ था 1971 के बाद, 71 के बाद, वही nationalism evolve कर रहा है. But the good thing is it is evolving into something I hope better. लेकिन nationalism वही है जो 71 के बाद हुआ था, जिसने बोला था कि पाकिस्तान को मल्टी कल्चरल कंट्री ना बोलो, ये टूट जाएगा. एक ही मोनोलिथिक आप एक थिंकिंग बना के रखें, वही है. लेकिन वो ज़्यादा सर्वाइव नहीं कर सकती बिकॉज डाइवर्सिटी बहुत है इस कंट्री में, और वो जो हम नेशनलिज्म ने डेवलप किया था वो उसको अकोमोडेट नहीं कर सकती. बट दैट इज़ द सेम लाइन विच इज़ नाउ इवॉल्विंग इन समथिंग बेटर, आई होप, स्लोली बट श्योरली. Otherwise, it'll collapse and then सभी इधर उधर भागते फिरेंगे.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम.
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Sir, I'm just asking you about that statement that Muhammad bin Qasim was the first Pakistani. And if I heard right, you said that Sindh Archaeology Department found some mosque at Mohenjo-daro 5,000 years ago. I mean, it's very confusing for me.
No, not 5,000 years ago.
वो एक लाइसेंस प्लेट मिला था जिसमें मोहम्मद बिन कासिम.
Mohenjo-daro civilization is
I'm saying that area, वो जो प्रोजेक्ट जो था पाकिस्तान आर्कियोलॉजी डिपार्टमेंट, उनका प्रोजेक्ट मोहनजोदाड़ो में था, तो उधर ही आसपास उनको शायद अभी भी है वहाँ, शायद मोरो के करीब है या किधर है, मोहनजोदाड़ो में नहीं है. उसको अभी भी कहते हैं कि मोहम्मद बिन कासिम ने बनाई थी. बनाई भी होगी, पर वो एक अलग चीज़ है. ये कहना कि मोहम्मद बिन कासिम पहले पाकिस्तानी थे, वो बिल्कुल ही अलग चीज़ है. तो that is what I was trying to imply.
Right, up here, okay, then up here.
You said that the first pop singers were Nazia and Zohaib. I think the pop singing here started in 1970 with Roona Laila, Alamgir and Shaiki. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. अगर पहले बात की जाए तो वो तो पुरानी मेरी थीसिस है. The first पॉप सिंगर तो असल में
मान लो गलत कह दिया है ना,
अहमद रुश्दी. नो, सिग्निफिकेंस की बात कर रहे थे. अगर आप देखा जाए द फर्स्ट पॉप म्यूजिक, अगर आप देखें, पॉप सॉन्ग वाज कोको कोरीना 67 में अहमद रुश्दी का. दैट वाज द फर्स्ट एवर, अगर कह सकता है, पाकिस्तानी पॉप सॉन्ग. दैन यू हैड रूना लैला, दैन मोहम्मद शेखी आए, फिर आप आलमगीर थे. आलमगीर तो नाजिया से पहले थे. बट मैं ये कह रहा हूँ जो सिग्निफिकेंस जिस एल्बम की, जिस स्टार की थी, जिसने वाकई चेंज लाया, अगर आप बात करें जो आपके वाइटल साइंस के बाद से पूरी जो वेव आई, वो अगर नाजिया और जोहेब नहीं होते तो वो वेव इतनी स्ट्रांगली नहीं आती. मोस्ट ऑफ दीज किड्स जो मेरी जनरेशन के थे, व्हेन वी वर ग्रोइंग अप, वी न्यू मोर अबाउट नाजिया एंड जोहेब एंड वी डिडंट नो मच अबाउट रूना लैला एंड अहमद रुश्दी. ये तो बाद में आई बात.
Okay, sir, I want to ask about Malala, as you just said, that she can be used for Pakistan by CIA in the future. As you know, when she was shot, she was taken by the army, she was taken into army hospital, and when she transferred from Pakistan to London, at that time, also it was, the army was involved in that. But as you just said that that the Pakistan, she can be used against the Pakistan, and she's a this whole story was fabricated and all these things. Before, if you see, if you watch her old videos, her face was totally different. And when she was shot and she came back to Pakistan, it was totally changed. You can see the difference in her face. So if you think that this all is fabricated and everything what happened is just done by CIA and she can be used, so what was happening then? Why was army involved in that? And why in the future, what will be the role of CIA with the Pakistan army and how it will happen? I just wanted to know this.
There's so many questions, I don't know.
सवाल ये है कि and I agree with him, मैंने खुद इसे बहुत समझाने की कोशिश की है. She is not a cyborg. She is a human being. ठीक है ना? And she will not be used by CIA. ये तुमने जो फैलाया है, तुमने काम खराब किया है सबका.
Her name wasn't Jane. और उसके DNA से टेस्ट पे आया था कि वो
उसका नाम प्रियंका था पहले, तुमने जेन बना दिया था. ठीक है. We'll take another question.
Can I?
Yeah.
From the topic, it said bus by bus. Bus. So ye to, and you are justifying your sobering down and maturing and all that.
That was his.
तुमने कहा bus. What are you saying bus to? You didn't talk about Junaid Jamshed पे भी कोई बहुत भड़कता हुआ नहीं लिखा आपने जब उनका वो ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन आया. फिर पाकिस्तान की वो जो एथनिसिटी का भी था. लेकिन ये जो है सोबरिंग डाउन आपकी जो है नदीम, ये बिल्कुल नहीं चलेगी. You have to get angrier. You have to get angrier and you have to get bolder. Are you really scared? Because you have not written.
When people weren't
this
angry.
Malala thing you have to write after what he said. वो कैसे समझे वो क्या समझे आपके आर्टिकल का? तो उसका बोले तो आप तो बोलते ही नहीं हैं. आपने इतना सेफ प्ले कर रहे हैं और हम बैठे हुए हैं. Where is that Nadeem? NNFP KFC is going to come back. So you can't play it safe like that anymore because ये क्या हो रहा है?
That is a very bad advice.
Oh.
I have to. You see, जब आपके आसपास कोई नहीं बोल रहा था तो उस वक्त गुस्सा आया और बोला. अगर आप देखें, especially if you're on social media, 99% लोग गुस्से में रहते हैं. तो it's better कि 1% जरा थोड़ा sober.
I pick up your article, there is a topic, and then it just softens out. And then I feel that really is that how you're going to get us thinking after the PTI government especially?
No, you see, I'll tell you something.
So much is going.
I'll tell you something. You see, in the end,
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Okay. And fair enough. But एक point ऐसा है when I started realizing that I am talking to the converted. फायदा नहीं होता. So when you want more and more people to at least hear that point of view, you have to be a bit sober कह लें, a bit more objective, because I want more and more people to, because देखिए, like I said, in the end you make your own readership. एक ही किस्म के लोग आपको पढ़ रहे होते हैं. They already believe what you believe. So to expand your experience or to expand your message, you have to sort of sober down, take their point of view as well, you know. बाकी जो चीज़ें हैं वो सैटायर में निकल आई, बट आई सेड वो सैटायर भी उस तरह का ख़त्म हो गया. अब वो लंबा सैटायर पढ़ते नहीं हैं. अब उनको मीम्स चाहिए, उनको छोटे छोटे वीडियोस चाहिए और मज़े की चीज़ें बना रहे हैं वो. अब वो मुझसे होता नहीं है.
This is the final question for the session.
Nadeem, you hear and read a lot about censorship that's happening and which is also leading to self-censorship. So any comments on that, and has it affected you personally in any examples you can give?
Very much so. It happens, it keeps happening, and usko aap self-censorship bolein, but like I said, in the time I was growing up, I learned how people were taught how to go around things, especially now. when I started writing for Dawn, one of my first editors, or rather assistant editors, was the late Murtaza Rizvi. उसने मुझे बड़ी ज़बरदस्त चीज़ें बताई, यार ये चीज़ इस तरह लिखोगे तो दबा के रिएक्शन आएगा, यही चीज़ आप किसी और तरीके से लिख सकते हैं, you know. And Dawn में एक है तरीका, you can say a lot of stuff, but by not censoring it, but by replacing certain words with because I think it's very interesting, but I've noticed कि आप कोई words इस्तेमाल करेंगे, you get a reaction which is not very healthy, but वही चीज़ आप किसी और words को आप use करके कहेंगे तो you won't get that reaction, you get a more let's say informed reaction. So I won't call it self-censorship, but it is going on, and I understand why it's happening, of course. और ये नई चीज़ नहीं है, इस मुल्क में बहुत ज़माने से हम काफ़ी चीज़ों के बारे में डिबेट नहीं कर सकते. जब भी मुझे हंसी आती है जब फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच की यहाँ बातें कर रहे होते हैं लोग टीवी शीवी पे, तो वो एक सर्टन फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच की बात कर रहे होते हैं, बिकॉज देयर आर सर्टन टॉपिक्स विच दे कैन नॉट टच एंड वोंट अलाउ दे वोंट टच. ठीक है ना. तो फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच अगर हम बात करते हैं, फिर वी शुड बी अलाउड टू टॉक अबाउट एवरीथिंग. यहाँ 18वीं अमेंडमेंट की अब बड़ी डिबेट चल रही है. सेकंड अमेंडमेंट पे डिबेट हो सकती है? कभी नहीं हो सकती. तो फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच तो नहीं, सेल्फ सेंसरशिप तो हो रही है और वो इनहेरेंट हो गई है. और आई एक्चुअली एम्पथाइज एंड सिंपथाइज विद पीपल हु डू इट. आई डू इट एज वेल फॉर ऑब्वियस रीजंस, एंड दैट्स व्हाई थोड़ा सोबर डाउन होना पड़ता है.
Anyhow, we've come to the end of the session. Thank you so much,
Thank you very
Nadeem,
much.
and thank you everyone for being here.